the hope is to kind of premeditate on a few things that are top of mind and have a curated group of people to talk to about it. And, this was for me, one of the initial reasons I wanted to start a group like this is I was just out of college and I didn't have too many people that I can talk to about various random things, from physics to relationships to problems I was having to all these things. And I'm hopeful that this kind of trusted group can be an extension of that. So we collected a number of kind of different questions and ideas. And Tom, maybe we start with yours. I know it was very much top of mind. I know you and I spoke about this in person, and it feels like it's a recurring theme in your life. So I'm sure you've given it a lot of thought. But why don't you just give the context? We can start there and just see where we end up.
Sure. So just from an overall perspective, a lot of people I meet, they, if you talk to them in their 20s, they said, hey, I'd love to get married. I'd love to have kids. I'd love to buy a house. I'd love to put my kids through college, so on and so forth. And then 40 years go by and they check off all those boxes, and, they've had a quote unquote successful life, but they're still on this earth, right? And they're kind of wondering what's next. And so what I am, kind of continue to look at is that whole balance between what's enough versus enough versus I don't even want to say more. Just a balance between all the things you have going in your life and where, what do the next 10, 20, 30 years look like, and designing those things. And not necessarily the whole bucket list, more or less living in the bucket, but being happy in the bucket that you've chosen to be in. Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of things that I'm kind of looking at. Over the years, I've read various books and done, various things. I just saw in WhatsApp yesterday, that was a cool thing that came out of the Duke research about the 8 things around happiness, things like that. Or, the other thing that's out there, of course, is literally like a 2-minute assessment on the wheel of life. And, on a scale of 1 to 10, friend, love, spirituality, so on and so forth. And it's almost like, if you have a bunch of 6s and then you have a 9, or you have all 9s except one, it's, your wheel is kind of broken. That's kind of the thought. But it's if you guys read my questions, they probably seem to be rambling, because that's that I'm trying to, grab the tiger by the tail, right? And so and again, I see it more as a process. I'm not really looking for, okay, the answer is X. More so, have you guys read good stuff around this topic? I referred to Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money, which was good for me. And I thought that was a great book. So as you guys have you guys come across things that you say, hey, you might want to check out such and such, or have you considered this? Or you might even say, hey, you may want to rethink your question, which I'd be open to. So. And
Akeem, I know you raised your hand, and Tom, just again, quick to maybe set the stage, and maybe I'm sure it's both, but given your profession, is it something that you're looking to kind of pass on to clients? Is this more of a personal thing? And again, it's probably both, but I just wanted to understand that.
Oh, great question. I struggled a little bit. I always talk to clients about it, but I used to have a process that was too long and too cumbersome. And eventually people understandably are like, hey, I gotta leave, So it's more of, what can I learn and pass on, versus I need to find a process that I can implement with my clients. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Akeem, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I would like to share a personal epiphany, I would even call it, a recent one that ties into this. it came out of an exercise, what is work? And I realized that I got a lot of things backward. And I think maybe that's also a societal thing. So I was always looking at work from an ego perspective, right? What do I want to work on? How much money do I want to make? What do I want to change in this world? And so on. And when I looked into what work really is, I think it's the best setup we have to make society work, right? If you think about it, society wouldn't, like, we get so much out of society. It's hard to fathom, right? Like there would be no security, there would be no shelter, there would be nothing if it wouldn't be for society. And so we invented this thing evolved called work, where we separate, like we specialize. And so that's why we do certain things and we want to get better at them, but we always look also at the demand. And when the demand is high, we earn a lot. We create a lot of value, and so we get a lot of value, right? And I think, especially my generation, I think we lost this communal sense and we got into this ego perspective. We got into like, how can we cater to ourselves and so on. But if you flip this, I think that's when you go into this ego perspective, there's a lot of unhappiness. There's a lot of unfulfillment. There's a lot of, okay, you continue because you're somehow unsatisfied. But if you are useful, if you provide something to society, if you give something back, then all these good things come to your life. And you even see it in your private life, even with children. Like there's nothing, you give yourself up basically if you have children. And that's the good part of it, right? That's what the rewarding part of it, where you really ultimately get most out of it in return. And so I would stress that point, that if you think about work from that perspective, that unlocks maybe new perspectives of not having enough and stop, but rather, okay, now I'm on a certain level, I have financial stability. How can I provide now to society? What can I do now for this whole endeavor to work? And I think that then brings, again, fulfillment and some natural human flourishing with it. And yeah, I'm really happy about this insight for myself. And again, like from this perspective, it unlocks a whole new thinking, basically.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate it. So did you do that work on your own, or were there a couple of resources you used?
Yeah, there's this book, Designing Your Life, and it's about applying design thinking to your life. And there's a work view and life view, and the work view comes with a set of questions like, what is work? And I can share in the chat here what I wrote there, and the book, a link to the book. I will put this in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's awesome.
For me, I found this as a good useful reference, and divide life in two. The first part of your life is where you're accumulating knowledge to be a productive member of society. And then the second half is when you start passing all the knowledge that you have and share it with others. So I found that framework quite useful in terms of kind of dividing up. But I think the two of them somewhat interact because we continue to think, how can I continue to learn? How could I continue to grow? But that was something that it resonated with me.
Thank you. That's a great way to look at it. I appreciate that.
And Tom, I would maybe add, my cynical view of education is like the most important things can't be taught or like aren't taught in schools. And this is one of those, right? And I think even just this notion that setting up those buckets of your life is like very idiosyncratic in like a big way. But again, there's like, it's kind of on your parents or you to like walk through that, right? Like there's no class in school to do that. So one of the most helpful things for me, and I have this huge whiteboard right here that I just look at all day, is just outlining those buckets and like what success / enough is in each of those, right? Because like, if you don't know what you're striving towards, you don't know what enough is, right? Like it's just this very slippery slope of, whatever, you're just working really hard and trying to learn a lot, but towards what end, right? Like when when do you reach a summit? And if there is no summit, that's fine. Just like know that, right? And that's, I think the no summit thing is super interesting when it comes to health and family and these sort of like infinite games, if you will. I'll put that in the chat after. I think that's maybe another good one to think about. But to this whiteboard and to these bucket ideas, to me, again, it's like a thing I've ripped through every day just to try to keep it top of mind, right? But it's health, it's family, it's friends, it's community service, it's work, it's spirituality and personal growth. Like those are my buckets. And I know like very specifically in each of those what success for me looks like. And I say for me because that's super important, right? It's not what society says, it's not what my parents say. Hopefully it's what Danielle, my wife, says, but like not always, right? And I think that's like pretty important. But it's hard to be weird and it's hard to do things that are different, and it's hard to kind of be independent minded a lot of the time. But I remember Danielle and I did this like early on. It's just like, let's design our perfect life. We have this for travel budget, we have this for school, we have this for our house, we have this, that, blah, 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 blah. And we got to some number. And that number was like probably an order of magnitude less than, if you just were to pull a number out of thin air as like, what's your ideal life? And then it's like, oh crap, like that's actually not that inconceivable, right? And it's not that like that lowered our ambition or that we don't want to do more or that, if we made more, we could just give back. But I think it's just super interesting to know, again, that's like an ideal life. It's like, oh, shit happens and like we don't have that. Okay, like we can live on half that and we can still be like totally okay. So to stop my rambling, I think it's just like definition of buckets and what success looks like for you. And then again, if you have a partner or if you have kids or, colleagues, like how do you integrate with them and make that transparent in a way, I guess, of like, hey, like this is what I'm looking to do here in this job, in this life, in this partnership, whatever it might be. But I just don't think a lot of people know what that thing is, right? And then whether you pass it or don't get to it, you don't know because there is no sort of metric is too right-brainy, too left-brainy. It's like too hard, but like some general view of what you're working towards.
Great, that's very helpful. Definitely helpful. Because it's funny too, because I also think sometimes you may, because I definitely have this discussion with clients, and it's like, hey, you know what? If you turn the clock back and said, this is what I'm going to accomplish, you've done those things. They're like, hey, I didn't even realize that. You know what I mean? Because to your point on the awareness and having the buckets and communicating the buckets, I think that's a great point.
No. And Peter, to pick on you, we can make this a totally separate thing, but does this tie into motivating change, which is your question, or do you see it as a wholly separate discussion? And that's fine. We can bucket it later, but just wanted to see if there was a tie in here that might be fun.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, of course there's tie-in, definitely. And I think it goes more to the individual than the group. How do you design, but then how do you implement and motivate yourself to to follow through, I guess is kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah.
Tying that together, whereas my inquiry is more about, how do you motivate leadership in a group setting?
Cool. All right, let's put a
designing your life and then actually following through with it. I mean, we could spend hours just talking about, physical exercise. I mean,
yeah.
The internet, the tools on the internet are abundant now. You don't need to pay anybody to have the body of an athlete, but how many of us actually get up and do that every day?
Yeah, totally. All right, let's put a pin on the motivating change, and we'll dive into that solely in a second. But Jamo, I'll pick on you a little bit because I know you and I have talked a lot about this kind of area of stuff over the years. What would you say? Like you're way more structured than I am. You track, at least we're like when you reached out to people and what you spoke about and, all your like personal challenges as well. Like I'd be curious what you'd have to say to Tom's question.
Yeah, appreciate the tap, boss. And so good to chat with y'all today. This is amazing conversation, even in a few minutes. I might come at it a slightly different way, Tom. I agree with what everybody's saying. But something I've been trying to think about or reflect on a lot lately is actually trying to break down my own sense of control over life, over the ability to design. And that is certainly my home base. As Boss was saying, I could show you my personal goal spreadsheet and all the data I track on myself and all that type of stuff. But sometimes I think one of the ways you can assuage that existential friction of, what am I supposed to be doing, is just trust that what you are doing or what you could be doing at a sort of a next step is right. And not to say that Instagram reels have all the truth in the world, but there was one I caught recently that basically the argument was, we spend all this time agonizing over decisions over what to do, but often just committing, just doing anything in your pantheon, trying to probably mitigate risk, but doing anything gets you a data point and actually gives you data over how you reacted to that decision. And then based on that experience, based on the action that you took, you then have something to make a future decision off of, instead of a priori trying to discern what is the best decision. You kind of get a way to string it together. So I think, and to me, there's a balance of trying to apply these frameworks, trying to parse out the important parts of life to you at different phases. But then ultimately, if I think, anyone's kind of stuck at a given moment and they have a set of options, maybe it's just a little bit of throwing the risk to the wind, or whatever the phrase is, and going for it. Because the other sort of simple idea I might finish with, Tom, that comes to mind, especially at a later stage of life where you have accomplished so much and there's this sense of, okay, what do I do now? I've done everything that I thought I would do. It seems prime for just the general idea of pattern disruption. So doing something you haven't done before, and seeing how that feels. And that can be extremely scary and potentially risky, depending on exactly what you're doing. Maybe don't jump out of a plane, but if you want to, cool. But ultimately, that feels like a opportunity to do something new too. Those are a few thoughts.
Oh, I got an operator error here. I apologize. So a couple of things. I mean, thank you so much. I don't know if, one of the things that I don't know if you guys have followed, like Karen Casey and A Course in Miracles and so on and so forth. Some of the stuff she's written, and she would argue you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. To your point on the whole, the balance between trying to get there and am I there, or do I measure it, and so on and so forth. So I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. I think it's an excellent point. And also, do something different, something you have never done before. And I'm definitely working on that. I don't like to announce things, quite frankly, because people, right now my son, who's 26, he and I have started to do some triathlons together. So we did a couple half Ironmans this year, and in July of 2024 we'll be in Lake Placid for the full Ironman. So say a prayer for me. So I got to get better at suffering between now and then. So, but the great thing is it's totally tied into the family piece. I mean, he and I talk about it all the time, and you would probably appreciate the whole data piece. And so, I completely understand what you guys are saying. I'm totally on board. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Tom, is there anything you want to cap this off on, or should we maybe move to Peter's question?
No, I'm totally good. I definitely appreciate, the time, the energy, the insight. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to add to that I put in 2 resources. The first one is from Harvard Flourishing, and it's a free app. So, there's lots of obviously paid apps, but I just came across that this morning and thought that was kind of interesting because it has a measuring tool. And then the other one, which is not something I recommend, but I just to quickly reference it, I found a reference online. But human design, a couple people that I'm acquainted with through Better Up Coaching, they've started to really tap into this human design, which is a bit esoteric, but again, they're just kind of benchmarks for people that you're talking to, and different tools for different people. But I think some people really gravitate to this sort of stuff. So human design, and I think there's another one, gene something, that are both becoming quite popular in the coaching world, whether you agree with them or not. Just some things to think about.
Thank you so much.
Peter, let's turn it over to you if that works. Motivating change was the extent of your question. Why don't you frame it for us a little bit and give us just a little bit of context and where you're coming from?
Yeah, and thanks everybody to help me think through this a bit. So Reader's Digest, I was involved in a public task force around the emerging economy and came up with a hypothesis around commercializing innovation rapidly. And it really kind of came out of the idea that I realized venture capital was too late stage to really move some of these wicked problems forward out of the applied research space. And the other one was realizing applied researchers weren't entrepreneurial by nature. Why are we forcing them into being founders? So those are kind of the two questions that really sat with me, is how do we come up with a different financial model, and how do we come up with a way to support applied researchers in the entrepreneurial journey? And so we came up with a hypothesis, which is really a venture studio / private equity model. And then when I brought that back, to the policy wonks and the investment community, nobody was interested. And I find it really interesting because what this led me to realize beyond just that hypothesis is that there's a lot of really good ideas that are coming from society that just aren't even being looked at, let alone thought about, talked about, debated, or implemented. And it kind of led me on a different odyssey around what is it that prevents great ideas from being moved forward, and to the point where you could have the best idea in the world and nobody even wants to touch it. What are the reasons, and how do we get around that? And for me, I've kind of tried all the tools I can come up with and got stuck. So I'm really kind of asking for other people's experiences and inputs and ideas about how to communicate change. Knowing that it's there's just so many good ideas out there that aren't even getting to the light. And I'll stop there.
But take a quick stab at it, and we're super curious on what everybody else thinks. But Peter, as a touch of background, my biggest kind of project day to day is in the healthcare AI space, and I'm supporting a CEO that spun out his early research from Vanderbilt as a research institution, and so some of those themes of crossing the academic to commercial divide are very familiar. Just for what it's worth, my personal anchor point is on the sort of finance strategy side of things, but I made the jump from consulting to early stage life about 8 years ago, and have been involved in a lot of operator and advisor sort of roles ever since. But I think zooming out to where you landed your overview, which totally understand, I think it starts with a conversation about risk, and both at sort of the individual level, the internal inertia it takes to change whatever you're doing, oriented towards whatever that potential good idea might be. Probably starts there, but then there's equal rungs at sort of the group and higher order organizational social spheres too, where I think when you jump from the individual up to some higher order group, that higher order structure has its own incentive systems that is also resistant to change and resistant to orienting itself to something that is new or disruptive. If any of you know Tim Urban, Wait But Why author, his latest book, What's Our Problem, is sort of politically, societally oriented in terms of its content, but I love how he brings this multidimensional framework to some of these deep questions where it's not just a two-dimensional problem, it's actually a three-dimensional problem. So there's a little bit of thing there, but maybe to try to end this ramble, I wonder if we had more mechanisms to encourage the individuals to share and to test and to make that easier. And I know I feel like some incubators, venture studios, whatever the earlier side of the world are, those organizations can inspire some of that activity. But maybe it's just continuing to try to match dollars and support for those early ideas. But as you go down the spectrum, I'm sure you have more experience here than I do, the risk of trying something new is really what falls off. And even the best idea might not come to life. So there's along that spectrum of idea to implementation, you're sort of encroaching on this complexity spectrum of even if it is the best idea, it might not work in the world. So maybe there was a couple of helpful things there, but it's very interesting. And if you solve it, let us know.
Yeah, I think what I got out of what you're saying is the root cause is this cultural norm around risk, and that seems to be what's causing us, the challenges. So how do we redefine the concept of risk in the idea of resolving wicked problems?
Maybe to add, Jamie, when you mentioned this, like maybe it's more on the personal level to bring ideas already out there. I have the background of trying to build a startup for the last 5 years that's all about connecting ideas and sources. Like there's so many great articles, so many great videos, and we all consume them, but it's hard to actually then keep them and evolve them into something. And the idea was to have little entities that you can connect with each other and have a kind of knowledge graph. And I think it failed also part because I put it now in hindsight, I started it from the wrong direction. I started from myself, right? From the individual that says like, okay, let's hold on to all these great ideas. Maybe I can do something with it, or other individuals. But I think now in hindsight, it's more the other way around. It's about like putting ideas out there and seeing who else, like you share it with as many people as possible. And then people react to it and connect to it and maybe want to work with you or something. And on that idea. And I think that's the second part. The second part is every idea is kind of worthless. There's risk and so on. But if you have an easy way to implement it, to solve a problem with other people, right? Other people can implement it. Then the magic happens. And this is interesting because we live in a day and age where this is generally very easy, right? If I think about myself, I could implement so many ideas. At the same time, I kind of choke on all these ideas that are in my head, that come my way. And so now I'm currently working on a like new angle of it that is mostly about sharing these little tiny small nuggets, right? Like it's all about also to be short. That's maybe why Twitter and so on work quite well in the beginning, because it's easy to get something out. People get the idea, it's already shared, and then things evolve. But doing this on an individual level is quite tough, right? Publishing and keeping track of what you said in the past and so on. And well, I stop here, but I think that's a wonderful space. And in summary, it's about the implementation, a small implementation. We can do more than we think individually. We have all the tools, but we also need other people right from the very start. So doing it out in the open is key.
Yeah, and just to build on that, the idea is open sourced, and I am giving it away. And it's interesting because what that makes me think about when you were talking is this idea of public relations. So along with in changing the risk profile as a society, when we look at wicked problems and change, and I'll use climate obviously as the big hairy goal. And you know, I think from what you're saying is how do we accelerate the public relations? Like there's so many gatekeepers to create that kind of early adopter, early tribe, you know, and then how do you move that forward so that people sponsor the idea and open it up to their networks? And it's like I said, this has been super interesting as an experiment, just to try different things. Like, you know, ultimately, you know, you need to find either a high net worth family that wants to experiment with their national economy and take credit for it, or an elected official that's looking for a, you know, a platform to talk about new ways of moving innovation forward for economic development. And so I don't know those people personally, and most people don't. You know, how do we accelerate public relations, connect with the tribe, and then how do we motivate that group of early adopters to use their social networks to actually get at either the funders or the politicians? And so, you know, again, I'm not a policy analyst or a lobbyist, so this is all new to me, but it's quite interesting about just human motivation. When you know everybody's identifying the problem, you're offering a solution that's open sourced, and people can't grab onto it and do something with it. And it's been really interesting. So how do we accelerate public relations, and then how do we change the risks so people will promote it?
Question for you, Peter. One of the things you talked about was PR, and as you think about that, is there, I heard this, it's surely not my term, but is there some kind of snackable idea, something bite-sized that, you know, people would react to? You know, whether it's, I mean, the incentives either seem to be fear-based or, you know, unlimited upside, right, on the two extremes. So I don't know if there's a way to communicate climate change. If we don't fix this, we all die, you know, which of course is horrible to think about. But is it about the messaging, or is it more about like delivering the solution?
I think at this point it's all about the messaging, and I'm hoping AI will help me write that message, because, you know, this is the interesting thing when you're doing this open source and you don't have funding for traditional public relations. I mean, this is an expertise and a specialty that you would hire for, you know, somebody that you know, knows the media, knows how to get your stories into the media. You know, that's a whole industry amongst itself. So I'm kind of figuring out, you know, what are interesting techniques around bootstrapping, and, you know, what is the hook, what's the headline? And there's actually a group, I'm from Canada, if you haven't figured that out. There's a group that's called futureeconomy.ca, and he offered me the opportunity to write an op-ed. So I've been kind of taking this advantage to say, like, you know, how can I use AI to, you know, to write better copy to get those hooks, and what is the hook? And I think climate, again, is such an interesting subject, whether you believe it or not. Just from a PR point of view, you know, it's been going on. What are we're on, like, you know, COP26 or whatever. Like, this is not a new issue. And I just actually did a kind of odyssey across North America for the last few months, went on quite a big trip, and I see no indicators anywhere in northern US or all of Canada that says anyone is even considering these issues. And even though the media is full of content and you know, great arguments from both pro and con, but you know, other than the grift trying to get, you know, money out of the federal government, which every country is doing these days, I don't see any consumer change. So yeah, so I think those hooks and stories are what I'm looking for. Like, what is that hook? where people are going to go, oh, you're right. Like this idea of technology transfer, commercialization, venture capital, these are really actually flawed models in our society if we're trying to improve, you know,
Oh, no.
You lost him. Let's give him another second here.
other issues that are pressing, right? Like wars and so forth.
Peter, one other thing that comes to mind real quick too is, or maybe a dimension to think through some of these things on is alignment of the timescales is maybe the like fancy consultant way to say it. But just I feel like we get so wrapped up in one of the things as our human experience that we can't get over is we think only from our perspective in time. And the reality is when you're talking about something like climate change, these are dynamics that operate on thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years, right? And that's just so unfathomable that it's, even though the impact is bigger than anything we can ever imagine, it doesn't inspire us to change our daily patterns. And, you know, it's even, I would say that this is not a new thing. The science is fairly established and robust, and we have great reason to believe. But when we are talking about like weather patterns across the globe, our knowledge is still limited, right? We don't have perfect understanding. So maybe to frame it as a question, it's how do we break down the big bad into something that aligns with our individual timescale? And just to throw out a random example, maybe if instead of you know, climate change, a lot of the efforts were rebranded as anti-big weather events, right? Like nobody wants a tornado, nobody wants a hurricane, nobody wants a drought. And those things can be very impactful, and probably people have felt them more so than they've felt this generalized sense of warming. So you know, it's like, is there a rebrand opportunity there to focus it on something that aligns with how we actually feel time in a way?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. And I've A/B tested this idea of, you know, I don't actually talk about climate science. I talk about air quality and water quality because I think those are actually the issues we should be talking about. And again, it's just, you know, it's interesting that the messaging hasn't landed. But I like your idea about time. And you know, one of the hypothesis inquiries is this idea of venture capital. So what caught my attention is everyone saying, oh my God, we have 10 years to meet these targets, or 2050 now, you know, we keep sliding the rule forward. And, you know, and I said, well, from my experience, which is pretty vast, I can guarantee you venture capital is not going to support within the time frame you're looking for. So that is a model you need to stop publicly investing in and supporting with public resources, because venture capital supports, you know, high altitude growth. And there's a lot of misinformation, and I don't know, I actually can't figure out why it ever happened, that, you know, so many entrepreneurs and innovators assume venture capital is just going to throw money at them at the idea stage. And I don't know why that hasn't been corrected, because it is a cultural norm globally. And it's just not true. I mean, venture capital is 10 years out, you know, from technology readiness level 1 to 10, you know, like it is not going to help with wicked problems. So yeah, I like that, to think about time, both in that context, but also, you know, the multi-million years, which is the, you know, the climate denier, right? I mean, they're like, wow, this is, you know.
And maybe one angle that could also bring us to another question that I saw, but just to add this angle here to this conversation, I think, you know, if we operate on a higher level, on the society level, on the human level, then all these individual points of views are mixed, right? And I think it's hard for us humans to see this higher mixed view, because we have our own view, right? And we probably know for ourselves what's right and what's wrong. And there are millions of people who think the other way, right? Like they are completely turned, and maybe they're right. And this the humans figure out a way to mix this over time. It's a messy way, it's not fun and so on. But over time, if you look back, things evolve and we are quite adaptable. And so I have hope in a lot of ways. However, I also know that I don't have all the knowledge. However, you can, for whatever basically point of view you root for, you can get audiences, you can get funding, you can for the things that you don't see as true, people have huge audiences, huge networks, huge communities, and so on. So this is a chance, right? This is part of this process. Is you pick your side and then you rally, you go out there with messaging and so on, and over time it will evolve into something for the greater humanity. And this brings us to digital marketing, I think, because this is so important. I mean, for everything you want to support, if you think this idea is a good idea, you need marketing, you need other people, you need to bring it across to other human beings to get some audience and some mass behind that idea. So maybe that's a good bridge to another topic I saw.
And it is, to simplify it all, it's like, what is the hook? What is the hook? That's the question.
But the Europeans are so far ahead of the US, and I think Jim can probably provide some plenty of examples of what you're doing in Amsterdam and in terms of climate change, and it's fascinating because we're barely thinking about here in the US.
Well, I think that's the inertia question, right? It's hard to think about it in North America because we've been in the extraction, business is what's paid for everyone to go to university, right? I mean, it's undeniable.
Yeah, it's a big system change, right? And yes, true. In Europe, we are, for example, just that because the cities are more walkable and you can take a bike easier, maybe to some extent. For me, I see a lot of change in the mobility section, and I see a lot of people want to adapt these new green technologies and so on. And it all depends again on how much are you invested in another technology, and also how much do you trust higher entities like organizations or even the state to somehow lead that change, right? Because this has to be done with some steering, right? Like even in an organization, we fully accept it, right? We want some leadership in the organization, even if it's not perfect and we know it. But on the state level, sometimes that's hard to accept and hard to trust. But I think that's also part of the equation. But it's a big topic, right? However, I see the US also as leader from the technology point of view and from communicating ideas and so on. I see a lot of positive influence there, right? Like we are constantly looking to the US when we look at the cutting edge.
Peter,
So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We set this up as a 45 minutes, and some people I know block their days and are actually organized, unlike myself. So I just want to be super mindful of that. I'll send out an email to this crew after, but I'd be curious if this format was useful, right? I think the way we did it before was a little maybe too open-ended, and you didn't know what you're going to get. And sometimes it was magical, sometimes it wasn't. But with this idea that like, I really need a mastermind crew to just jam on this idea with, and if we did that semi-regularly, if that would be helpful. So no need to answer that now. I enjoyed this. Hopefully everyone here did too. But maybe we make this a better, maybe this is the structure moving forward. So I see some head nods, I see some thumbs up. That's encouraging.
Gratitude. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Always trying to experiment and see what we can be doing slightly better. So thank you, as always, for taking time out of your day. We're all busy. We all have a lot going on. And it's really cool to have this crew come together to jam on things. So hope you all have a beautiful day. We'll make this happen again in a few weeks' time and go from there.
Thank you so much, Lars.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.